Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you this afternoon. Nice, bright spring day, the last of March. March came in like a very limp microphone, but what can I tell you? We won't talk about that. Music, Teresa Atkinson.
Yeah, I need it down here. Thought I'd start with a patriotic song. Feel free to sing along with me if you like. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and round thy good in brotherhood, from sea to shining sea.
Thank you very much. Invocation. Right behind you. There you are, Dottie.
Boy, that was fun to sing out loud in public together.
I know it.
You guys sound great from up here. I don't have anything greatly inspired other than I'd like to spend just a moment to pray over John and a new project we have. So if you don't mind joining me for this evening, for this lunch. Lord, thank you for the new pavilion in the marketplace. What a great gem it, I believe, will be for us. But there's a few more things that need to happen. And Lord, I ask that for your provision and for your guiding hand. And thank you for all those that have been involved all the way to this point. And I pray that we can get there and that it will thrive and flourish in our community. And pray a blessing over our speaker today, Lord, as the H2A workers are key to what's going on in the fruit industry. Help our understanding. And we pray for a great crop this year. And those pray over our members here, that those for their own health and their loved ones as well. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. And we can also thank the Lord for, or ask the Lord also to on the work day, not follow Kelly Connaughton's weather report. So we'll try for a cooler day. Anyway, welcome all guests. If you have a guest at your table, just kind of raise your hand, and we're happy to have you here and hope you can want to join. If you could possibly do it, we'd be happy to have you. So, welcome. This afternoon, I know all of you received an email about this, but if you're like me, the emails kind of come and then if they don't demand action in the next 2 seconds, then they kind of roll down the spike. But this afternoon at 4:30, the folks, Deb Sterling, Rebecca Padell, Eric Silvers, Esther Huey, have worked really hard with this racial justice committee, with our racial justice committee, which started about 2 years ago now. And they're just doing a little update. It's going to be very short and focused. And we have a facilitator who's going to keep everybody on track. So it's just a 45-minute commitment. So if you look at your email and you have time between 4:30 and 5:15, we'd love to hear from you, because I know they and everybody on the committee is looking for some input and some feedback and whatnot, rather than always working in silence, so to speak. So, with that, we now turn it over to the wonderful Sarah Morgan, who just led a pretty wonderful fundraiser for us.
I'll stand on my tiptoes. Thank you to everybody who came out to support our lobster drive. It was a first annual, and it sounds like the enthusiasm it may be a continuing thing. Thank you to Nicole Donegan and the field group for their extra special work on our logo and the whole concept, and to Darren Davis at Waterfire. He pulled out the stops. Yeah. Thank him profusely if you see him. Support his restaurant because he supported us by giving all the proceeds, just his cost, and then all the proceeds came to us. We did over 124 meals. Almost 2 cases of wine were sold. We raised nearly $5,000, and I don't think we burned out any volunteers. It was just a really easy fundraiser. So thank you for your support on that. Let's look at maybe doing it again next year, and would appreciate your support going forward. So Ways and Means will also start the marble draw next week. So bring cash, or we're hoping to have a square. So if you forget your cash, you can still spend lots of money for Rotary. So I hope everybody's a winner, spends lots, and we make good money off that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know those of you that partook of the lobster, as I did, were just absolutely amazed. It wasn't a little lobster. It was a lot of lobster. It was really good. Now, introducing a new member, which is always a great thing to do. Austin Beebe to introduce a new member.
Thank you very much. So for those of you who haven't met Selena yet, this is Selena over there in the dark. You can stand up a little taller if you like. Yeah. If you haven't met her, I really encourage you to take a chance to go and meet with her, understand what she does for the community, how excited she is to be here in Yakima, and what she does for the AGC. A little bit about Selena. She was born in Chicago. And at the age of 3, her parents migrated back to their hometown back in Mexico. She spent many happy days there at her grandparents' ranch, loving that ranch life, getting her hands dirty, I suppose. Helps build the immune system, right? So that's good. And then back in 2005, moved back to Illinois. Her family made a couple other moves since then. They did come back to Yakima, where she went and graduated from A.C. Davis High School in 2009. And then once she graduated, she went to Central Washington University with a BS in Safety and Health Management and a Master's in Engineering Technology. So talk about a serious career goal. I'm not that smart to graduate in engineering, so I applaud you for that. But I do appreciate the safety aspect, so good job. Immediately after graduating, she went to Seattle, spent 7 years there working as a safety manager for a large construction company. Obviously, as did any of us coming from Seattle, decided it was awful and moved back to this side of the mountains. And moved over here to Yakima, joining the Association of General Contractors, or the AGC, where she is now the Central District Manager, Safety Specialist, and general amazing businesswoman that she is, guiding our contractors throughout Central Washington, both in safety and risk management on that side. She's married to an amazing guy, Eddie Sanchez, who I was lucky enough to meet at one of the AGC conventions. Great guy. They're high school sweethearts, so apparently have stood up, liked each other long enough to get married. They do have 2 children, Ian and Luna, and 2 fish. Lizzie's fine for a fish name, but I want to know who named Goop. Ian. So Ian named one of their fish Goop. I don't know what name that is, but I love it. She loves to cook, paint, bike ride, dance, and apparently sing. But it says here, I didn't comment, she says she can't sing very well. So I think karaoke is in the books for us next. And obviously hike, which is perfect here for Central Washington. Sort of a weird fact about Selena is she's the only person within her family who can't roll her tongue. Now, do you mean like that, or do you mean like the R's? Okay. Well, apparently she's not very talented, but she's a very good business professional, I'll tell you that much. So I just want to give a big round of applause to Selena. I've had the pleasure of knowing her for about a year now. Welcome her to the Yakima community. She's looking to get more involved. And then one other thing that I just really want to applaud is the mentor-mentee program that we've been putting together. Even before she was a Rotarian, as of now. She joined that program, and she joined to be a mentor to a young gal who she's meeting with and talking with too. So I just really want to appreciate that initiative that she's put in place. So big round of applause for Selena.
Welcome. Glad to have you. Here's your red badge, in which you know the rules that are the drill. You go through education and whatnot, and then you'll get the blue badge. Perfect. The blue book, plaque for your wall, and the license plate holder. Perfect. There you go. Welcome very much. Delighted to have you. Thank you, and actually, I was going to also thank Austin for that mentorship program. Margaret Filkins and he and the Rotaract team put together a great event, and I think it's going to be a really exciting thing to go forward. Also, it was nice to hear that we have a future karaoke singer in there, because Ways and Means might want to use karaoke as a fundraiser, right? Or maybe not. Okay. All right. Bob Udell, you are somewhere here. I saw you. There you are. It's hard to miss the hat. This is somebody you cannot argue with, so whenever he asks you today, I think you have to remember that he carries a gun and handcuffs.
But only one bullet. It's on, it's ready, okay. Because those of us here last week, I had technical difficulties. Today, we're on, right? Okay, all right. So my job today is we're going to talk about the Rotary Cleanup Day that's coming on the 30th of April, 1 month away. We're going to be out there, a lot of us, I hope, working on the cleanup day. And there's 3 places that we're going to focus on. It worked. Yes. Rotary Lake. And if you haven't been out there before, it's the one right off of 82 and First Street. It's a pretty good sized lake, and there's a little bit of garbage out there to pick up. I went out today to look at it, so it's ready for our attention. It is, it was screaming actually when I went out there. Sarge Hubbard Park. Now, Sarge Hubbard Park, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be able to do, because I've talked to Kelly, and that's also Taco Fest Day. So we'll we'll see what we can do, what we can't do. But that is on our normal schedule of cleanup. And then the East Yakima Ave Rotary Welcome sign, which I didn't have a picture of, so I thought I'd put one up there that everybody noticed. Okay, so, because aren't we the Palm Springs? So yesterday I had a young gal from TV station came and she interviewed me. I said, so where are you from? She said, California. Oh, I said, and you ended up in the Palm Springs of Washington. She said, not so much. So I'm sure she'll warm up to us. She's only been here a couple of months. All right, so Rotary Lake, that's the big deal. I got this. I went into the Rotary archives, and I found there's one member I recognized. Virgil's in there, if you can see him. Now, hopefully it does not look like that. I don't think it will. But it has been 2 years since we've been out there. So this means I'm going to need some help. This is going to be really important. There is the sign-up sheet on your tables. We'll make it fun. My wife's in charge of fun. I don't know what she's going to do, but it'll be good. And so sign up for the big day. And this is a big one. You know, my dad used to tell me, many hands make light work. Now, I grew up on a farm with my dad, and he had lots of little clever sayings. You know, one I really enjoyed was, farmer's work is never done, all right? Then he said, a farmer never stops working until his work is done. I think, well, that's when I realized I needed another career. Okay. And these areas really are some of the gems of Yakima. A few years ago, I had a deputy sheriff, and he was going across the bridge, and he looked down and saw some filth, and he organized a huge cleanup because our river system, those lakes, really are a wonderful characteristic of our valley. And I think it's so neat that we're out there keeping that stuff clean. And they get a lot of use. And also, I think Kelly said they're going to stock the lake in a couple weeks. So when we're out there, we'll probably see a lot of young people fishing as well. And the last thing you don't want to miss is the Admiral is going to direct efforts from this boat that we're having specially flown in for him. Okay? So he's already told me he doesn't want any garbage in the duck, but we'll see. All right, April 30th, sign up, and we'll have a good time, and we'll make it look good out there. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Bob. And I'm looking forward to that boat. That's what I do best, is sit and watch and tell other people what to do. So, and in that, who can argue? So, Sergeant at Arms, we have Mr. Mike Hummel.
Thank you, President John. My fellow Rotarians, I'm going to apologize in advance for the topic of my speech today. For it's a topic you've heard before, and I really strive to bring new material to each one of my Sergeant-at-Arms duties. But I've got to speak up because our four-way test has been violated, and I've stayed silent for way too long. I've heard discussions throughout our club, and I've even seen presentations from this very podium presenting you with misrepresentations and flat-out falsehoods about which university in the Pacific Northwest fields the best football program. I've heard Huskies bark that the Dogs have the best team. But come on, Huskies, even you've got to admit that things right now are a little less than ideal. The Huskies finished the 2021 season with a 4-8 record. The coach was fired for punching a kid on the sidelines mid-game, and nobody's ever heard of the guy that's replacing him. The future's kind of bleak. But Mike, this one time in 1991, when Coach James was still there, the NCAA voted, and they said we could share a national title with Miami. Come on, Dogs. If you ever given or received a participation trophy, pay $1. Now, there may or may not be a certain attorney in this town who may or may not be a member of this particular Rotary Club. And said attorney may or may not use every minute of his Sergeant-at-Arms time trying to convince you the best football program in the Northwest lies in Eugene with the Ducks. Now, I'll give credit where it's due. The Ducks do, in fact, field the second best squad in the Northwest, but they're not number one. I imagine being an Oregon Duck fan is kind of like that one summer back in college when you dated that really attractive young lady for a little bit and you knew she was out of your league right away. She had all these fancy outfits she changed into all the time. They were really colorful. She ran this really high-powered offense that got you all excited. But deep down inside, you always knew she was going to let you down the moment she found somebody taller, better looking, and probably from the Southeastern Conference. If you have ever watched a University of Oregon Duck football game and thought, even though those uniforms are uglier than hell, I kind of like them, pay $1. The Cougs. Oh, the Cougs. Let's be honest, you're kind of an easy target in this arena, so I'm going to take it easy on you. There's also far more of you in this club than any other school, and I'd like to be welcome here tomorrow, so I'll go light. And it's been a rough road for Cougar football forever. But through it all, you've kept your heads held high and the loyalty to your team knows no bounds. In fact, you are the most loyal fan base I have ever come across. It's true, and that is not a joke. I have genuinely never seen a group of people more excited to spend their hard-earned money and the precious little vacation time that they have with their families to make a once every 3 years pilgrimage to some iconic American city like El Paso, Texas, to watch a 6-6 Cougars squad battle it out against Coastal Carolina A&M in the Kraft Macaroni and Cheese Bowl in a contest that is ultimately going to decide which team is less relevant on a national stage. If you have ever traveled to an away game to root on your team, whatever the team, pay $1. That's right, my fellow Rotarians, the best college football program in the Pacific Northwest does not lie in Seattle, Eugene, or Pullman. Nope. The best college football program in the Pacific Northwest can be found in the sleepy college town of Cheney, Washington, with my alma mater, the Eagles of Eastern Washington University. Yes, it's true, but don't take my word for it. I'm not a cable news personality up here to puke word vomit at you without ever providing a single fact to support anything I say. No. I bring data to my arguments, and the data says the Eagles are clearly the superior squad. Let's begin with team records since 2010. Now, this is the only category in which the Eagles don't take the top spot, and it's by the thinnest of margins to the Ducks. But I'd argue that this one even works in the Eagles' favor. While the other three schools play their first few games of the season against clearly inferior opponents so they can warm up, The Eagles have to start their season against bigger, more powerful schools like Texas, California, and the other 3 that are up there. If your team has to schedule tune-up games to warm up, pay $1. How about losing season since 2010? Well, there's only one school with an unblemished record during that time. If your alma mater has had a losing season since 2010, pay $1. Sorry, Cougs, it doesn't look good when we put it up there. Still not convinced? How about Associated Press top 10 finishes? Once again, you'll notice the Eagles lead the way with an astounding 8 out of top 10 finishes since 2010. 6 of those 8 are top 5 finishes. The Ducks hang tough yet again, but remain second fiddle, while the other 2, well, you know. If your team has had less than 8 top 10 finishes since 2010, pay $1. Let's look at the ultimate measurement of success in sports, championships. You notice that both the Eagles and the Ducks have 2 national title appearances since 2010, but, well, if you don't win any of them, you're only a bridesmaid. Yes, the Eagles of Eastern Washington are the only Pacific Northwest school to win a national title since 2010. If your alma mater has never won a national title in football, pay $1. You get out of this one, Huskies. Thank you, Don James. By the way, I'll also point out that at the FCS level, we have playoffs. There's none of this voted in by a committee and they just tell you who wins. 24 teams enter the arena and play for another month, and only one team is standing at the end of it. It's real football. Now let's focus on some stats that are a little less obvious, such as what your alumni have accomplished at the NFL level. Well, Eastern leads the way here as well. NFL Offensive Player of the Year? Yeah, we got one of those. If your school has never produced an NFL Offensive Player of the Year, pay $1. If you graduated from UW and you didn't know that Warren Moon won this award in 1990, pay an extra $1. Is Jan Luring here today? Okay, good. She got out of like everything. Ohio State's pretty good at football. Of course we've got a Super Bowl MVP. We're the best school in the Northwest. If your school has never produced a Super Bowl MVP, pay $1. If you're a Cougar and you didn't know that Mark Rippon won this award in 1992, pay another $1. All that good early glory days, early 90s glory days for UW and the Huskies, man. It's exciting what you guys did when I was 8. Eastern is the only school in the Northwest to produce an NFL Triple Crown winner, which is given for leading the league in all 3 major statistical categories for your position. If your school has never done so, pay $1. That is all of you unless you're an Eagle. And wouldn't you know it, EWU is the only school in the history of the country at any level, ever, to produce a player who won the NFL Offensive MVP, the Triple Crown, and the Super Bowl MVP all in a single season. If your school has never done that, please pay $1, and unless you're an Eagle, that's you. And so, my fellow Rotarians, I invite you to come on out to Cheney with me this fall and join me for a tailgate and watch the best football program in the Pacific Northwest continue its dominance. You never know, you might just get a chance to watch the next Cooper Cup play college football. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. That's up at the top of Sergeant at Arms. Also, I think you should point out that Eastern Washington probably also graduates the fastest talkers. And with that, we have our time for our speaker, and he will be introduced by none other than Jordan Matson.
Welcome, fellow Rotarians and guests. It's my honor to introduce John Devaney again. I didn't actually do a lot of prep this time because I think this is the 4th time I've introduced Mr. Devaney. As many of you know, he is the president of the Washington State Tree Fruit Association. Prior to that, he was the president of the Yakima Valley Growers Shippers Association. As such, he's been directing our tree fruit industry for the last, hold on, I can do the math here, 13 years. Lucky 13, which is a little bit ominous, John, because today, for this, you sent me a resume that was awfully polished. So I'm kind of curious what you're trying to do here, man. As the president of the Washington State Tree Fruit Association, he is in charge of overseeing the association's industry education. So going out there, educating tractor drivers, our safety aspects, environmental compliance. He's also in charge of data collection, which looks at how big our crop is. And I would say one of the most important of all is interacting with state and local activities. So I brought a list here of a few of the different ways he does that for the tree fruit industry. It is 29 different committees from Northwest Hort Council, U.S. Apple Association, Enterprise Washington Political Oversight Committee, Business Institute Board of Directors, Office of Rural Farm Worker Housing Board, Executive Committee, partners of our Food Security Partners for Rural Washington Board of Directors, Washington Policy Center, U.S. Global. It goes on and on and on, 29 different boards and committees. So for that, I say thank you, John Devaney, because I don't have to do that as much. I do have the pleasure of seeing him on a regular basis as his board. It's one of my favorite boards to be on. No offense, John, or other John with an H. He does have a wife and 2 children, and I do want to say the last time I presented, he was trying to become an empty nester, but today he is an empty nester, and I think he is still married, so that's great. So anyway, with that, I'll end it. Thank you very much, and John, let's hear about H2A. I'm so excited.
So it's a tried and true practice to seek pity before you start speaking. I'll just say Jordan is my chairman. Now I got you all on my side. You may be thinking, okay, John is going to talk to us about a federal guest worker visa program for temporary agricultural workers. Some of you right now may be thinking you have urgent business back at the office and maybe thinking you have to schedule at some time to run out the door. I would say no, that is not exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the people who are coming here under that program. H2A is about agricultural workers. They're about the hardworking people who make our food system work and who make our valley's economy work. And I think it's very important that I was able to do that this week because this is National Farm Worker Awareness Week. Let's all say thank you to them. Over the last 2 years, we've heard a lot about who and what is essential, but I'd like to give you a little context about how important agriculture and the agricultural workers who make the ag industry go matter to our valley's economy. And I'll ask for a little bit of apology because I'm also 1 week into bifocals, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of this. Agriculture is 27% of the jobs in Yakima County. Still very important to our local economy. We tend to discount the importance of things that have been around for a while and dwell on the new and exciting, but agriculture is still a huge part of our local economy and growing. Over the last decade, still 46.5% of the job growth in Yakima County was in the ag sector. So this is still a sector that's growing and adding economic activity to our county. Some people undervalue agriculture and agricultural jobs because 22% of the income from wages is in the ag sector. You notice that's different from the 27% of actual jobs. That's because a lot of the jobs in agriculture are seasonal. A lot of them are entry-level jobs on the rungs of the economic ladder, not doing the highest wages, but they support a lot of other jobs in the community. If we did not have agricultural workers harvesting our crops, you would not have truck drivers, sales and marketing executives, all the other folks in industry whose job categorizations don't get counted as exclusively agriculture, those box manufacturers that just get counted as manufacturing jobs. But if we did not have agriculture and agricultural workers, that economic activity would not be happening in our valley. So it's extremely important that we remember them. Now, agriculture does remain very seasonal. This is a challenge for agriculture in terms of talking about what kinds of jobs we need, how many people we need, and when we need them. This is one of the first charts. I was feeling bad that I was going to have so many charts for you all, and then Mike did his sergeant at arms, and I thought, okay, I have fewer statistics than he does. We're good. This chart up here, the flat line is the year-round agricultural work. The lower dotted line is the seasonal agricultural work. That top line is when you combine the two together. So you see there's about a 80,000 job swing in the number of people employed in agriculture from the winter months when not a lot is going on in farming to the peak of agricultural production in our state and in our valley when we have production in cherries and through tree fruit crops and others as well. So there's a lot of short-term employment connected with agriculture, and that is a recruitment challenge. It would be ideal if we could switch a lot of these jobs to being 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, 52 weeks a year, but that's not how they work. As a result, agriculture has long been, these seasonal agricultural jobs have long been that first step up the economic ladder for a lot of people, either who are new to this country or who have suffered economic dislocation and have relocated to seek new opportunities. Now, we tend to also assume that what we've experienced recently is how things have always been. That chart on the left, and the numbers are a little small, so they're kind of hard to read, but these are figures on Washington State's demographics of farm workers based on past census data. And if you look, you have to go back to what I don't consider that long ago, to when I was born in the early 70s. My kids say that's ancient history, but you know. When 88% of the farm workers in the state of Washington were non-Hispanic white. There was a lot of people who came from the Midwest, Dust Bowl states, Arkansas, who relocated here to work in agriculture. That changed drastically in the latter part of the 20th century, to the point that now, if you look at the most recent figures from the National Ag Worker Survey, almost 70% of the farm workers in the United States were born in Mexico. That's not just how many are Latino, that's how many were born in the country of Mexico. If you look at the domestic workers, that additional 30%, a third of those were Latinos as well from Mexico, and then another 3% who were from other Latin American countries. So overwhelmingly, at this time, the agricultural worker population is Hispanic, Latino, and specifically Mexican. But that was because of that one particular trend over time, and it continues to change. We know that we tend to think of farm worker and migrant as being synonymous, but that has been changing over the past couple of decades as well, as more and more farm workers have chosen to remain in our community, to not be going back and forth across the border, largely undocumented, back and forth across the border at great personal risk. So many of them have settled permanently in our agricultural communities. That is a healthy thing for them in terms of acquiring other jobs, remaining enmeshed in the community, but it means that our perceptions of migrant and farm worker is not necessarily the same. If you look at that migrant population, it's also broken in half. 6% as of 2018 were domestic migrants, people moving from state to state following crops. Another 6% were international migrants, like H-2A workers coming on temporary worker visas. So the actual number of workers moving around from state to state, which we tend to think of as farm worker and migrant, is a diminishing percentage of that population, which means when we talk about agricultural labor needs, we're largely looking at who's available to do that work and wants to do that work here in our community. And people don't just stay in the same job. People don't migrate to the US. They don't look for other economic opportunities so they can stay in the first job they get for the rest of their lives and pass those jobs on to their kids. They're looking for economic opportunity. And that's actually something that our industry, though it causes long-term recruitment issues, supports. The tree fruit industry's official charity is an organization called the Washington Apple Education Foundation. Have you all seen those Washington Apple license plates? I've got one, right? They're great. They're not to support the industry other than by visibility. The proceeds of the sales of those license plates actually go to the Apple Education Foundation to support college scholarships for the young people whose parents work in our industry. 80% of those students are first-generation college students. They reflect the demographics of our industry, largely Latino students going to college for the first time. And we support those students with over $1 million a year in scholarships generated by the tree fruit industry alone. So there's a lot of opportunities for those folks who get higher education to come back and work in other areas of agriculture, but a lot of them move on to other things too. And that's why their parents migrated here. That's healthy and that's good. But it means that agriculture has to ask the question, where are we going to get workers in the future? Where are they coming from? Well, they're not going to keep coming from Mexico on their own. If you look at the demographics of Mexico, Canada and the United States, Canada and the United States are those lower two lines, and you look at Mexico, the top line, 7 kids on average through the 60s and into the early 70s. That's a lot of people being generated in that country. So it was not a surprise that if you were in rural Mexico and didn't have a lot of job opportunities, you and your siblings were thinking about getting somewhere where there were jobs by whatever means necessary. But as you go into the 80s and people in Mexico move towards having 2 or 3 child families, the population pressure changed significantly, and the labor market in Mexico changed significantly, so there were more economic opportunities, which meant there was fewer people coming on their own. As a result, though we heard a lot about walls in the last few years, the actual population of people from Mexico in the US declined, starting in 2007. There were actually more people returning to Mexico than were arriving from Mexico. So there was not a flood of new people coming north seeking agricultural jobs. That has changed the dynamics of our industry and agriculture fairly significantly. That means we're increasingly relying on who else is available and who's already here. Part of that is keeping the current workforce as employable as possible, as long as possible. As a result, we're seeing an older workforce in agriculture, trying to extend the time in which they're willing to go up and down ladders carrying heavy things, and diversifying the genders of people working in agriculture. We had a significant increase in the number of female farm workers over the last few years. By using not full automation, this is not all robots, but putting platforms in orchards, for example, so the physical demands of agricultural work are less severe, you can extend the amount of time people are working in agriculture. That helps, but it's not fixing the whole problem. So we start looking around, who else wants to work in agriculture? Where are there other people looking for jobs? Well, we're not alone in agriculture looking for people who are looking for work. This news release came out just last week. We actually have the lowest number of unemployed seeking work in the United States since we've had in the late 60s. Huge shortage of available and willing workers looking for jobs. And when there's more jobs than there are people, those workers have choices, and they might choose indoor work in air conditioning with year-round and regular shifts over things that are seasonal, where your employment might vary from week to week depending on the weather, and if you lose a crop, you might be unemployed and lose your opportunity to work. There's a lot of uncertainty in agriculture, as any farmer or farm worker will tell you. So if your other opportunities are working in fields where you could be in a warehouse or an office environment, those workers may choose that. That leaves us a big gap then. And increasingly, the gap in employment in agriculture is being filled by temporary foreign workers through the agricultural guest worker program known as H-2A. This is a chart of the growth of the use of the H-2A program in Washington State. Looking back here to the year, let's see, the earliest year on that chart, see what I mean, 2009, we've gone from about right around 1,000 workers to 30,000 H-2A jobs filled in Washington State in just that time. That's a lot of increase in use of that program. And that's not just a Washington State phenomenon. This is the chart nationally for the number of H-2A workers in the United States. We've gone from under 50,000 just in 2006. Yes, am I right? Yes, 2005, excuse me. The far left one is 2005 when there's about 50,000 to over 300,000 jobs filled by H-2A in 2021. That's a lot of workers coming in on that program. Now, I say jobs and workers, those are not the same thing. You notice there's two bars for each of those. The blue line is the number of jobs filled. The orange line is the number of visas issued, because some H-2A workers work multiple contracts in a given year. So they might have a farmer who says, I've got a pruning contract in the winter and a thinning contract, and then I want a cherry harvest contract, and then maybe I'll offer an apple harvest contract. So a worker might have 1, 2, or 3 or more contracts over the course of one season, but they've entered the US on a single visa. So the actual number of people coming in is not 300,000, but the number of jobs being filled is significant. And I mentioned the difference because that is how the H-2A program functions. It is jobs-based, not people-based. It doesn't evaluate the entire United States job market and say, okay, we're going to set a target of 50,000 or 300,000 workers coming in to supplement the agricultural economy. For every single job filled, you have to specifically recruit for and prove need first. And that is a complex bureaucratic process, which I will tell you all about shortly. This is a last resort kind of option because it is so complicated and burdensome for agricultural producers to use. The program is designed to ensure that you are not harming any domestic worker. So from the Department of Labor's perspective, the fact that it's cumbersome and expensive is a feature and not a bug. From my growers' perspectives, it's a bug. It is very complex to use, and it requires that employers provide housing that's licensed by the state of Washington at no charge to the employee, to start with. So you have to make sure you've got licensed and approved housing available. You have to provide in and outbound transportation from their home, so from their location of their home in their home country all the way here and back again at no charge to the employee. You have to provide in-country transportation. So from that housing you're providing to the work site, you're transporting them back and forth, and if you're in a van, you're going to have appropriately licensed and inspected vehicles and so on. And you have to provide wages which are determined by the state and federal government to be at or above those provided to equivalent farm workers. So not only are you providing wages at or higher than what others in the similar positions are making, but you have all these other added benefits. All of that is designed to ensure that it is more expensive to use H-2A workers than any domestic worker you could possibly find. So that there's a strong incentive to find every last domestic worker willing to do agricultural labor. And it's not easy to use. This is a chart of the first couple of steps, I'm not going to give you all of them, of how you go through getting H-2A process approval. Don't even try to read that. It gives me headaches. It is extremely complicated, though. And that one of the factors involved then is that it tends to be larger producers who have an HR department or who can hire a consultant to help them through that process, who are the ones who are having to use that process. One of the problems with the H-2A program is it is so hard for both workers and employers to use, is it tends to be rationing the available labor to the larger, more integrated operations who have the ability to staff this kind of complexity. But I'll just give you a quick overview of some of the steps that you're going to have to go through if you're recruiting a foreign worker through the H-2A program. If you think you're not going to have enough domestic workers, your first step is you file a petition with the Department of Labor saying, I'm going to need 300 workers and I don't think I can find them domestically. So I will commit to paying those higher wage rates that you're required to offer, that $17.41 an hour minimum, and I will say that I'm going to try to recruit those. That petition goes to the Department of Labor and then the state workforce agency, the Employment Security Department, and that is posted nationally, and they start recruiting at the work source centers in our state and nationally for agricultural labor, and you are required to proactively advertise and seek employees. And so for the next 30 days, you're actively looking around nationally and regionally trying to find workers through that public system. If you find all of them that you need, you're done. You can say, okay, I've found enough workers. Usually that doesn't happen, and what you do is you're told, all right, you filled 4 jobs out of the 200, okay, you have 196 H-2A workers that you can then petition for. So then you file your documents with the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, Citizenship and Immigration Services, saying, I think I need this many workers, and you pay your fee to the Department of Labor, and you start the process of recruiting your workers abroad. While doing that, you also have to make sure your housing's been fully inspected and is ready to go by the State Department of Health and other fees involved there. For the remaining 30 days before your date of need, you're looking around for those workers, you're recruiting them, and you're still recruiting domestically. So you're both finding workers abroad and you're continuing to recruit domestically. Once you've got all of those workers lined up, both domestically and internationally, then you get to start getting them their documentation. So you're filing another fee and requesting their visas through Homeland Security, through Customs and Immigration Services again. You're scheduling consular interviews through the Department of State and paying a fee to them to process the actual visas. And finally, when you have your workers interviewed and the State Department has said, yes, they are going to follow the program and return back home, they're not a security risk, you've got all the documentation order, you pay yet another fee to Customs and Border Protection to let them enter the country, then you transfer them here. And after all those agencies have been involved, those workers finally arrive and they can get started working. But you're still recruiting. You still recruit domestic workers through the first half of the contracted period. And if anyone who's qualified shows up and says, I liked that job, I would like the free housing, free transportation, and the higher wage rate, you hire that person or you have a violation, you're going to get a very serious penalty. So you're still hiring domestic workers through the first half of that contract. If you brought up a foreign worker and you decide, I don't need you after all, you are bound to pay them 3/4 of the value of that contracted period, even if you send them home. So they're guaranteed that they're going to make 3/4 of the contracted money, even if things don't work out. So there's a lot of protections in place for the domestic workforce and the worker, and a lot of ways to go wrong. Excuse me, I didn't jump forward to that slide, did I? So you're continuing to recruit domestically after the workers get here. And I want to emphasize this. A lot of people ask, what are the requirements for H-2A workers? H-2A workers, once they're here, they are subject to all of the same labor and workforce protections as any other domestic worker. And as I said, once you're filing a petition for H-2A workers, you're usually recruiting domestically and those H-2A workers, so it's very rare to have a contract which is 100% H-2A workers. So you often have a mix of the two, domestic workers and foreign workers working together. They all have the same contract standards and the same labor standards. So L&I is going to come and visit and make sure everyone's following the same safety rules, and so on. There is a lot of oversight and compliance. The Department of Labor, Wage and Hour Division in particular, will come and check up on whether you're following all the rules from the federal perspective. The state government also has staffing at both L&I, and they've expanded the staffing there in the last year, and the Employment Security Department has expanded their staffing to oversee this program and make sure that everyone is following the rules. And that's a good thing that they're expanding that staffing because, as you saw, the number of people in the program has increased significantly. If you go from 1,000 to 30,000 people participating in the program, you're probably going to need more people to oversee it. So John, this sounds great. So why, when I look at the newspaper, do I hear that this is a terrible program and people are abused and awful things happen? Why is that? Are you wrong? Are your facts wrong? No, it's because we have different labor standards in different states. Some of you know that there's different regulatory climates in different states. Who's heard that? Who thinks Washington State is an underregulated state? No one? I didn't think so. So the problem is that when you hear about problems with the program, it is often because other states are not doing the good job that Washington State does in implementing this program. You have to meet safe and sanitary housing requirements, for example. Well, what does safe and sanitary mean? It means whatever the state labor department or health department says it does. So that was licensed H-2A housing in the state of Texas on the left. Looks very different from the state licensed and inspected housing to Washington state housing codes on the right. So everyone is following the rules in providing housing that meets local standards, but if local standards vary significantly, you're going to hear about bad things happening in other states that do not happen in Washington. I think it's very important that we all remember that. It also means that if some states have not expanded their staffing for supervision or are not doing those visits to make sure that everyone's following local labor rules, or if their local labor rules are just different from ours, you will hear about things happening in other states under a federal program that vary significantly from what happens in Washington state. You also sometimes hear, well, these foreigners are taking jobs that Americans want. Well, theoretically, you can maybe have that feeling, but we have a paper trail that says that's really not true. Because we have to recruit through the State Department of Employment Security through a public process, and we can document how many people are applying and did they get a job or not. These are the charts for the past couple of years on the number of people applying to the open H-2A job orders. The key numbers there are that individuals' applications, it's not a very large number, right? If you're looking at 30,000 jobs in the more recent years, less than 100 people applying, that's not a lot of people applying for those jobs. And when you talk to employment security, a lot of the people applying are in Mexico saying, hey, I'd like to come up and work on that job. And you say, well, you don't have a visa yet. So you have to be recruited in Mexico to come up. So then that qualified individuals are people who are actually have any kind of agricultural experience, and the threshold is usually 3 months of ag work experience in order to get an H-2A job. And then you have to be legally authorized to work in the US. And so you see in the last couple of years, like for example, in 2021, 2 people. Of 30,000 jobs applied, enlisted at the Employment Security Department, 2 applicants. And those employers would have been required to hire them and offer them work. If they were not offered work and choose not to accept, then you get 0. So not a lot of people filling these jobs domestically. That H-2A recruitment system and the work source system can be improved to work better for migrant and seasonal workers with limited proficiency, English proficiency, and it can work better when we're not in a pandemic. But it's still a big gap between 2 and 30,000. So there's still going to be a need for these temporary foreign workers. So I've talked about why it's critical to agriculture and why farmers need these jobs and why it sustains our agricultural industry. But what do the farm workers coming north on the H-2A visa programs get out of this? I'd like to compare some of the wages in Mexico that they would experience with what they can do working just a short period of time in Washington state. The minimum wage in Mexico, for those of us who do not work down there, is 172.87 pesos per day, which at the most recent exchange rate I looked at is $8.64. Big difference, that's per day. Big difference between $14.71 per hour in Washington state. The monthly average earnings for a farm worker, using some statistical data from 2019, which is the most recent I could get, is about $170 US. That's per month. So when you look at what you can earn on the current adverse effect wage rate, that $17.41 an hour, you're at about $139 per day working in Washington state as compared to about $170 per month working in Mexico if you're a farm worker. So the advantage of coming to the US means you can very rapidly earn a lot of money where your housing is provided, your transportation is provided. Other than paying for your food, you're banking a lot of money. In just a couple of seasons, agricultural workers can earn enough money to build houses with no mortgages in Mexico, to start businesses, to have enough to really change their lives in their home country. It's hugely transformative for the communities and those workers who are able to come north on these programs. I will say that is a challenge because Mexico is a very different legal environment to work in. You know, there's a lot of reasons that Mexico has problems. It's a great country, but they have issues with violence and organized crime. And when there's large amounts of money at stake, there is potential for corruption. And our farmers have to work very hard to make sure that that does not touch our recruitment process. And that's something that our state and federal government and our employers work very hard to ensure does not happen. I want to conclude by talking about a little bit, this program is really critical to the future of our agricultural workforce, because if we do not have enough workers to sustain agriculture, our current ag workers who are already here are going to lose employment. Farms will get smaller, they will outsource, we will have to outsource and offshore food production. Temporary workers support our local economy. They're really critical to supplementing that domestic workforce. And as I mentioned, it is really critical and transformative for those workers who are able to come north, earn huge amounts of money in a fairly short time under protected labor conditions in Washington state. That means that they're going to be treated well, and then they can return home with their lives transformed. It's a program that could work better. There's a lot of discussion around how to streamline it so it's easier to use for workers and easier to use for growers. But talking about federal immigration reform will take more than I'm able to do here at one Rotary Talk. We'll schedule a day for that. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions on this non-controversial topic. Kelly?
John, the H-2A program, is that exclusively for agricultural workers, or does it cross other industries?
It's exclusively for agriculture, and not all of agriculture is even included. So for example, it has to be production agriculture tied to a specific grower. So if you are packing fruit, for example, you cannot use H-2A workers for that unless it's only your fruit. You're not able to use H-2A workers in order to provide a service to others, for example. But it does include things like nursery stock, so like landscape nurseries and such that are producing things that are not food crops can also participate in the program. I'm not sure who is next. Yeah.
Quickly. Picture of Texas, picture of Washington housing.
Yeah.
Why would a worker work in Texas?
There's so much demand for those jobs that Washington State is an employer of choice, but as I said, the wage differential between Mexico and even states with lower wage rates being offered, like in the Southeast, it's still an attractive place to go. They can still make a lot of money. And to us, that housing looks terrible. Unfortunately, to a lot of people from Mexico, that can be par for the course, because the housing stock there is not as necessarily meeting the same standards as it is here. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any requirement for health screening for H-2A workers?
Health screening as far as arriving in the U.S. during the pandemic or just in general?
Regardless of the pandemic, I'm specifically thinking of there's a higher incidence of tuberculosis in southern Mexico, and a lot of these local workers up here tend to come from that region. I'm just wondering, but is there any requirement?
There is some screening as part of the recruitment process. Lately, it has been more a case of any obvious problems being a barrier at entry. For example, right now there is the requirement for anyone entering the U.S. to be fully vaccinated with a CDC or WHO-approved COVID-19 vaccine, which has been a problem because some of the vaccines most readily available in Mexico are, the Chinese and Russian vaccines, which are not as effective. I don't know the specifics about tuberculosis screening directly, but I know that in general you do need to show that you're in generally good health and are able to physically do, strenuous work. Yes.
Of the hundreds of thousands of people that are coming across our southern border now and say that they're here for a year, are they then considered domestic workers?
Domestic is considered people who are in the U.S. presently and show legal authorization to work. So some people who are refugees may be given temporary work authorization, or there may be people who are in the U.S. who are showing documentation that says they're authorized to work. Is that documentation going to bear up to a lot of close scrutiny? Not necessarily. You mentioned the people coming across the border, and I didn't elaborate on this too much, but here I said that the number of people coming north to work from Mexico has declined, but we see all the issues at the border. A lot of the people crossing the U.S.-Mexican border are not Mexican. They're from Latin American countries who are economic or refugees from violence in Central America or the Caribbean. A lot of Haitians, a lot of people from Nicaragua and other countries in Latin America where they're facing gang violence or political corruption and violence. So often they're people from urban areas who are not interested in agricultural work either, which is another challenge. But there are people in some of those countries who are interested in agricultural work, so it's not just people from Mexico who are coming north on H-2A visas. There's a lot of people from Jamaica, Haiti, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, increasingly Central America and the Caribbean are coming to Washington State. Mexico is easier just because we already have a lot of people from Mexico here and the cultural fluency is easier. Also because of that transportation requirement, flights from Monterey are a lot easier to get than from Barbados. So I would happily volunteer to go check out Barbados, Jordan. Someone in the back here, I think, had their hand. Oh, okay, great. Bob, you had a question?
Mine was conversion. Do you have any numbers on how many choose to become permanent visas or?
Right now, there's not a process for those H-2A workers to apply for permanent visas. The legislation that I mentioned that we didn't have time to go into in detail that would reform federal immigration policy would provide a pathway so that people who are coming in on temporary worker visas after a few years of doing that could apply for a permanent pathway. And that would be beneficial for both them and for agriculture. Not going to stay in agriculture forever, but providing some incentive to do that is something that's been under discussion. Oh, yes.
Who does the recruiting for the H-2A visas in the country, let's say Mexico? And like you said, there is a lot of corruption in the country. How is the worker actually receiving all the money? Or he has to pay money to be selected?
Their requirement is that they should not ever have to pay anything to be selected. And there's a lot of efforts here to say, did anyone try to shake you down for any money in order to get a visa or to be participating in this program? And if the answer is yes, there's a problem, and that's corruption, and that has to be stopped. Anyone who's participated in offering or paying a bribe tends to deny it, which is a challenge. There are recruiters of varying quality. Some are really good and run rigorous programs above board and following the law in Mexico. Some people not so much. And so it's like any other service provider. You can go with more reputable people, or you can go with people who are less reputable. There's an increasing effort to try to find third-party validators that will make sure that the recruitment process in Mexico does not get touched by corruption. We've had a lot of presentations to our industry on some of those nonprofit organizations that might provide that service. But yeah, it's a challenging environment to, when so much money is at stake, to have a process that doesn't get touched by some of the normal ways of doing business under some of those circumstances. Yeah. I think someone else had a question. I don't know, Mr. President, how much time we have left. Okay, one more? Okay. Okay, the question was how much more does it cost for an H-2A worker versus a domestic worker, given all those other costs? And a lot of that depends on how you amortize those costs over the contract period. You know, you're building housing, you don't just build it for 6 months use. Well, you could, and then your costs per hour would be significantly higher than if you're having them for 8 months or 10 months. So some of those costs, if you try to turn it into an hourly differential, it can vary depending on the term of the contract. But I typically hear numbers about $2 to $3 per hour more for an H-2A worker than a domestic worker, which is then, and because of that requirement with the higher wages and that cost differential and that requirement that you hire anyone who applies locally for those wages, that adverse effect wage rate, for example. So if you're offering $17.41 and everyone knows that for the first half of your contract, anyone who shows up can get that wage, if you're offering $17 an hour across the road, that worker is going to say, oh, I'll go across the street and work for that H-2A employer because they're required to take me at that wage rate. So what tends to happen then is the people who are not in the H-2A program say, okay, fine, I'll do 18. And then they survey what the wages are the next year. Oh, 18 is the prevailing wage rate for non-H-2A workers. So now H-2A workers are going to pay more than 18. So it tends to spiral upward rapidly, as we see with, in tight markets, you tend to get spot market pricing where the prices escalate very rapidly. And so the actual wage inflation in agriculture has been higher than the wage rate inflation in the rest of the economy for about the last 10 years. And it's been tracking with the growth of the program as we've had short labor supply. And I know you have another question, but I think we're out of time, so I'll stick around. Happy to talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. That was great. That certainly cleared up a lot of questions for those who are not involved in the program to understand the program a lot better. So thanks a lot. Appreciate that. And there will be a book in your name at one of the 2 community centers. So, however, I will tell you right now, it's not going to be this one because I've read this book. And any poor child that reads this book will want to slit their wrists. So we'll come up with a new one. So sorry about that. Anyway, next week, Alana Kennedy will be speaking at the Holocaust Remembrance, followed by the Central Washington Mountaineer, a program on the Central Washington Mountaineers by W.D. Frank. And then we have one of our best programs of the year, Vocational Scholarships. We'll follow that. So, and I don't believe there are any committee meetings after this meeting. So with that, we are adjourned. Yeah.